Hello, everybody. Chapter 24 and 25, saving the best for last. Ecology, ecosystems, biodiversity, extinction, all the things. And you may ask yourself, why in a human biology class would we care? The number one reason why we need to care is because our human health is impacted. When the state of the planet is not in homeostasis, then we are seeing dysfunction and dysregulation in ecosystems, and that impacts humans. So if you're going into nursing, I want you to know there are so many conditions, disorders, diseases that are resulting from essentially compromise of our natural resources. So here, let's dive in, and hopefully you'll enjoy this last unit in our human biology class. So we take a look at an ecosystem, or when we take a look at the earth, there is a living layer of the earth. This is the portion of the earth that contains living organisms. It's a very small layer. So if we were to get in a hot air balloon and float from the surface of the air up into the atmosphere very quickly, we are not going to see any living things, not even birds, right? So this living layer of the earth is called the biosphere. And the atmosphere, various layers of the atmosphere above that, and there are various concerns in different layers of the atmosphere, like the ozone layer, like low-lying tropospheric ozone, the greenhouse effect, and all kinds of things. So since our study guide, chapter 24 is ecology and ecosystems, we want to define an ecosystem. So essentially, remember, I think we talked about this in this class, that cells make tissues, tissues make organs, organs make organ systems, organ systems come together to form you, the multicellular organism. Then multicellular organisms interact to make a population. I should say multicellular organisms of the same species interact to form a population. Population of different species interact to form a community. Different communities interact with the non-living component of the earth, the abiotic component, to form the ecosystem. Ecosystems interact and form a broad landscape level type of organization of nature called the biome. The biomes come together to make the biosphere. So the earth is just as organized as multicellular organisms, okay? Even more so. Okay, so that is our ecosystem. So the ecosystem is going to contain the living component, and these are the interacting communities. And communities are many different populations of different species interacting, the fungi, the plants, the invertebrate animals, the vertebrate animals, it goes on and on and on, okay? The abiotic component of an ecosystem includes things like precipitation and temperature and latitude and altitude and the amount of sun or season effect. So there's all these non-living components of our environment that are impacting life on the planet, okay? Biotic components we are going to subcategorize into whether they are autotrophs, auto meaning self. So it might sound stupid. The automobile is a mobile, a form of transportation that you yourself can, take yourself on. So it's not like mass transportation. So auto means self. So you're either an autotroph or a plant. Autotroph can be algae. Autotroph can be blue-green bacteria. And the thing that plants, algae, and blue-green bacteria have in common is that they can make their own food through photosynthesis. And that requires green pigments. Okay, those pigments are called chlorophyll. So it could be chlorophyll A, B, A and C, whatever, right? So if you're green because of a pigment that is able to capture photons of light, then you're an autotroph. Okay, autotrophs can produce their own food. The rest of us don't have that ability. We are called heterotrophs. Hetero means we have to consume something else to get our nutrient and energy. Okay. So these autotrophs, so they have their chlorophyll for those things that are eukaryotic, so that would be our algae and our plants. Those organisms are going to use inorganic carbon dioxide in the atmosphere along with water, and they are going to do what we call carbon dioxide fixation. And in doing that, they're going to make carbohydrates for themselves, and they're going to make oxygen, and the excess oxygen that they don't use, which is most of it, is going to be contributed to the atmosphere. So we can thank our autotrophs for not only the oxygen in the atmosphere, but also for taking out some of that excess of CO2 in the atmosphere. And then thirdly, making the energy that's necessary for our food webs and food chains, okay? Everything comes back down to the producer. So we're taking a look at energy flow. We are going right back down to our autotrophs, our producers, and seeing how much energy are they bringing in. And that's going to dictate how many animals can be supported in that ecosystem. All right, so here's some examples. Some of my favorite, these are diatoms. They have silica or glass in their cell walls. And this one has been stained, so it doesn't really have its natural yellow-green color. But there it is. This is a tree, of course. And then we're going ahead and going up the food chain here. We're looking at some heterotrophs. These heterotrophs, like the caterpillar, is having to ingest this plant. It's going to help it, essentially go through its variety of metamorphoses and then become a butterfly and be able to reproduce and complete its life cycle. And this bunny rabbit, of course, if you've ever had a garden or even just a big yard and you've got dogs and, rabbits like to come in and forage. They like the fresh greens, either grass or some different greens in your garden. Of course, your dog may go, that looks like a snack to me. And if we go ahead and go kind of even more or further up the food chain, we have our carnivores. So we hear some kind of viper, pit viper likely, eating this lizard of some sort. And then, of course, we have a hawk. So maybe a red-winged hawk or a red-shouldered hawk or one of the numerous types of hawks that we have eating a snake. Snake eats, a lizard. So these are our carnivores. And then lastly, what hasn't been fully given its credit, I think, in most of our intro bio classes is that in addition to this magnificent terrestrial food webs, we also have something very similar but occurring in the detritus, or this inorganic layer of just broken down leaves and twigs and dead stuff, skeletons and so on. Essentially, we have our decomposers that are going to digest away all the dead organic matter. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper now into our heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are also called consumers. They cannot make their own food. They're not producing food, so they're a consumer, right? So the first level of heterotroph is the animal or the organism that eats plants directly. And you could just say primarily they are eating plants. We would refer to these animals as herbivores. You might also call them vegans, right? So herbivores will eat plants directly, and they use that energy in the plant to do all the things that they need to do. All right, so we have a lot of examples there. Carnivores are going to eat other animals. And so we have a variety of levels of carnivores, so we'll come back to that. And they're essentially eating other animals, and those animals are likely eating plants directly, right? So we can kind of see here that energy of the producer is moving through the food chain or along a food web. Now, sometimes it's difficult to place the omnivores. So most humans, of course, are omnivores. We eat plants and animals. So where do we put them when we look at a food chain or a food web? It's a little tricky. In a food web, we would just have arrows pointing to us and maybe green beans, and an arrow there'd be an arrow from the green bean to us, also an arrow from the chicken to us. Of course, feeding the chicken, there would be, some plants that are feeding the chicken. So that's how we would accommodate that in a food web, but in a food chain, it's a little trickier. So, all right, so for our consumers, I mentioned that there's various levels. If I'm an herbivore, that I'm eating my plant directly, I am a primary consumer, right? I'm first level consumer. If I have a carnivore that's eating the herbivore, okay, like humans that eat animals, we are secondary consumers in that situation. So we are eating chickens, which are more or less mostly vegetarian, or we are eating cows, which are vegetarian. So you can keep on doing this little game and saying, okay, well, mostly what we're eating are primary consumers, so we are secondary consumers. Now, occasionally, like if you do some go on wild animal hunts, or you hunt things that are not your ordinary, like deer, that you may actually be eating at the third level, so the tertiary level. So we saw in our previous slide, we had a hawk, which would be a tertiary consumer, eating a snake, which would be a secondary consumer, and the snake had eaten a lizard or chameleon or something, and it was a primary consumer. So we can easily see that, man, we have to have a big, broad base of these autotrophs, or these producers, to essentially supply the energy to the whole food chain. The bigger the base at the bottom, then the bigger the top level is going to be. So we'll come back to that. Now, again, I said that we haven't always given enough credit to our detritivores, or the detritus layer. So essentially we have these decomposing particles of organic matter, and we call that detritus. So it can be like twigs and skeletons from earthworms, and maybe droppings from an animal passing through. And so essentially we have organisms living in that like layer just on the soil of all this detritus, this stuff kind of breaking down. And those include our earthworms, beetles, termites, and ants. So they are feeding off of those parts of those earthworms, beetles, the earthworms, beetles, termites, and ants are eating the detritus. Then we have our decomposers. So bacteria and fungi are pretty fantastic decomposers, and what they do is they release enzymes outside of their bodies, and the enzymes digest away stuff, and then they passively take up or passively and actively take up those products of digestion from the environment into their bodies. So bacteria and fungi, a little bit different because they're decomposing. The detritivores are literally eating leftover remains, if you will, of things. And so that's how they're getting their energy. Okay, so when we take a look at an ecosystem, we're going to see that organisms play a role in the ecosystem. So for example, being a producer or a carnivore, that is their job, that is their role. We can dig down a little deeper if we're just looking at birds, for example. We can take a look at a niche that maybe a nuthatch is filling, compared to a brown creeper, compared to a goldfinch, compared to a bald eagle, compared to a great horned owl. So niches are going to be specific to the organisms of a particular species, and they're filling a role in nature. So the question becomes, what if we lose the role of that organism in nature because an organism or its population goes extinct? Okay, so the two big, huge themes in ecosystem level ecology is energy flow and chemical cycling. So we begin to talk about energy flow when talking about the fact that our producers are using essentially inorganic materials like CO2 and water, and in the presence of chlorophyll and sunlight, they are able to make glucose and oxygen. So we know that this is how we are bringing in the energy to the food chain. Now, the other big thing that's happening in our ecosystems is nutrients are going to be cycled. So we're thinking about water, we're thinking about CO2 and nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. We are going to focus on just some applications of the carbon cycle, and then we'll talk a little bit more in detail about the water cycle. Okay, so let's go back to this idea of energy flow and chemical cycling and look at a figure. So just as you might imagine, chemical cycling, it's also referred to as biogeochemical cycling, means that essentially we are just transforming a chemical from one type or one molecule or compound into another. So it's just constantly changing. It's not going anywhere. We cycle our chemicals, but unfortunately, energy always goes from high quality to a low quality. So in our ecosystems, when we're taking a look at the producers, primary, secondary, tertiary, even quaternary consumers, we see that energy is lost from one level to the next. Okay, we cannot possibly use every bit of energy that's available in the producers and send it all to our primary consumers. So we're going to see that there's always a loss of energy from one trophic level to the next, But in chemical cycling, we're just going to convert it from one form to another. So I'll see you, chapter 24, part 2.